Our topic is admittedly challenging for any group of experts, and we're going to ask your indulgence as an audience to help us with this. We are down one person on our panel. You'll notice from your agenda that Bill did not introduce our friend and colleague Skip Holbrook, who is a member of the HIDTA board and is the chief of the Huntington, West Virginia Police Department. Skip was with us yesterday and had to leave last night due to an incident in Huntington, and so is not now able to be here with us. But we're going to soldier on without him. One of the things that we're going to talk about first in our topic, which really combines two different topics together, is we're going to be talking about current trends in terms of supply for opiates, both prescription pills and heroin. You'll hear from Steve Conrad. Bill introduced Steve. He's the chief of the Louisville Metro Police Department. So Steve will be giving a large metro area perspective. Skip was going to help us with a smaller police department perspective. John Averett, experienced law enforcement leader himself, who also is bridging the academic and police gap on our panel, will fill in for Skip. But down here in the front row on my right is a fellow named Brett Hightower from the U.S. Attorney's Office in Louisville. Brett, will you stand up and wave so everybody can see you? Brett will be roaming around with a microphone, and so we're going to not just invite your participation, we're really going to demand it. We would very much like to get a little bit of dialogue going, not only with this first topic on the current trends in opiate supply, but also in our second topic, which will, I'm certain, just begin to discuss this issue. But we're going to talk about the challenges that face law enforcement, regulators, as well as public health officials in the reporting and tracking of overdoses, and in particular overdose deaths. And speaking for my colleagues in the U.S. Attorney community, I can tell you that that is of real interest to us in working on cases under Title 21 of the U.S. Code that seek to hold drug dealers and others accountable for supplying the drugs that lead to deaths. And so that's something that each state has a different system, and we're going to talk a little bit about what goes on in Tennessee, but I invite your participation on that topic as well. I think the dialogue will really be where the value is here. So let me start, Chief Conrad, with you. If you would talk a bit about opiate and heroin and pill supply in the Louisville metro area.
I'll do that. Thank you, Mr. Hale. It's great to be here this afternoon. It's sort of an interesting statement after a morning of some just riveting presentations from a number of academics and physicians and clinicians that you get your first cops of the afternoon, the room's half empty. What's that about? And I'll also start with a disclosure. I've never worked in narcotics, so if you ask me any really hard questions about narcotics enforcement, I probably am not going to be able to answer them. But what I will tell you, I've got almost 34 years in law enforcement, and I have seen firsthand the devastation that narcotics are doing, at least in my community of Louisville. I started as the police chief in Louisville about 18 months ago. I am born and raised there, got in the police department back in 1980, and actually left at the end of 2005 to become a police chief in the Phoenix metro area. So I was gone for 6 years and then came back. And upon my arrival, I was hearing that all of our crime, not some of it, just all of our crime was being driven by addiction to Opana. I'm like, wow, that's bad. What's Opana? And after our narcotics folks kind of filled me in and gave me an overview of the problem, I said, well, okay, what are we doing about it? They said, well, we have a prescription drug diversion unit. I said, okay, well, what are they doing? And they gave me an overview. They had 4 guys. And needless to say, they were overwhelmed, considering this is the biggest problem we were experiencing in our community. So within the first couple of months of my time there, we doubled the size of that unit. And I can tell you that they are working incredibly hard today. And we still have a significant problem with prescription drugs in our community. And I realize we're here to talk about prescription drugs, but in all candor, the transition that Ms. LaBelle was talking about this morning from prescription pain medications to heroin has really happened here in Louisville. And I got to believe there are a few things that are impacting that. First, and there was talk today about House Bill 1 in Kentucky that really brought CASPR into being. We had it, but there were docs that didn't have to enter their information into it, and I'm convinced that the use of CASPR has had a significant impact on the people's ability to do doctor shopping in our state. The crackdown in surrounding states on pill mills has had an impact, and I think the really significant changes have been the reformulation that was talked about earlier today of OxyContin and more recently Opana. And I think Dr. Deskin did that presentation on the economics that were involved here. I think this is purely an economical decision in Louisville, and again, this is based on information that was shared with me, but today, on the streets of Louisville, if you were to go out and actually find somebody to sell you a pre-reformulation 40 milligram Opana, it'd cost you about $160. The average addict's going to need 4 pills a day to maintain their habit. That's $640. You could buy a bundle of cocaine for $25 to $35. If that same addict needs 4 fixes a day, they're looking at $140 top end. For about 1/4 of the amount of cost they can support their habit, and I'm just convinced that is driving the changes that we're seeing. The really telling factors have got to do with what we're seeing happening in terms of our arrests, our seizures, overdoses, and then crime in our community. And I'll try to give you some 5-year comparisons. In 2008, we made 32 arrests in Louisville for heroin-related offenses. In 2012, we made 768. If I did the math right, that's a 2,400% increase in the number of arrests. This year we've made already 800, and obviously we've got months left to go. In terms of seizures, in 2008, we seized about a 1/4 pound of heroin. In 2011, we seized 63 pounds of heroin. Again, if I've done the math right, that's a 23,000% increase. This year, interestingly enough, we've only seized about 20 pounds, but I think there are some things going on in the market that somewhat explain that change. In terms of overdoses, we've not seen a significant increase in the number of overdoses in our city, but we're seeing a significant increase in the numbers of overdoses that are contributed or that had heroin as a contributing factor. Again, back to my 5-year comparison, we had 71 overdose deaths in 2008. 2 were associated to heroin. In 2012, we had 94 overdose deaths, and 51%, or 48 of them, were associated with heroin. This year already, we've had 85 overdose deaths. Although I don't have all the toxicology information back yet, I am convinced that we are going to continue to see that trend in terms of the significant rise in heroin use. I think, and again, our first presenter of the day, Ms. LaBelle, commented on the problem, and that is people being naive about the use of heroin. They really don't have any idea transitioning from some pill that they were able to crush and snort and inject. They knew how high that was going to make them, and with heroin they don't have a clue. And what we're seeing in our community in some cases is very, very pure heroin, and we are, I believe, having additional overdoses because of that. The issue of crime is a little bit harder to track. We don't, as most police departments don't, really know the motivation for why people commit most crimes. But I can tell you anecdotally, as we're making arrests, people are indicating that they are committing crimes primarily to support their heroin habits. This is particularly true in the area of property crime, burglaries and thefts in particular. Best example I can give you here recently, we had officers that discovered essentially an organized retail theft ring that was going into home improvement stores and shoplifting any items that they could shoplift. They would then return them to the stores, and without a receipt, as opposed to getting cash back, they would get a gift card. They were then selling these gift cards at a particular pawn shop where they were getting significantly less than the face value to be able to get cash they need to go and buy heroin. Now, we have over 100 people that are involved in this ring. 70 of them have been already indicted on theft and criminal syndication charges. And all of them that we're interviewing are telling us that it was about their addiction to heroin. Another trend that we're seeing is in burglaries, which are up slightly this year in our community as compared to last. And that's not the interesting trend. The trend is the fact that we have so many more women involved in committing burglaries. And we really were having trouble figuring that out. And we made some arrests, and we were getting consistent information back from the women we were arresting. Essentially, they were brought into the burglaries because they had to assist their male counterparts in judging real jewelry from costume jewelry. Apparently, they were stealing a bunch of junk, and they had to have women come and tell them the difference. It apparently really helps when you go to the pawn shop and try to get rid of that stuff. We've seen a significant increase in the number of women we've arrested in business robberies to include bank robberies. Again, when we have made arrests, what we are hearing is addiction to heroin. A couple of other trends. When I first got on the department, and again, I'm talking 34, 33 years ago, we didn't encounter a lot of heroin, and when we did, the people in possession of heroin were predominantly African American, and they were probably early to middle-aged, and they lived in parts of our community that were considered lower socioeconomic areas of our town. Today, what we're finding are predominantly white young people from that middle class to upper class parts of the community, and they are, I have to believe, getting started with what they're able to steal out of their parents' prescription, or stealing their parents' prescriptions. The heroin we're seeing in Louisville is typically described as white, which I'm told is Afghani sourced. We are starting to see black tar heroin, which is from Mexico, and some gravel heroin from Iran and Pakistan. In terms of the heroin coming into our community, I'm told that the vast majority comes from Detroit. However, we are getting reports of heroin coming in from Atlanta, Baltimore, Chicago, Detroit, again, Houston, LA, and Miami. There was a chart that was showed earlier that showed some of the different source cities, and I think that really tends to be what we're seeing here in our community. In terms of distribution in Louisville, I think Louisville and Lexington, which is 70 miles to our east, are predominantly responsible for being the source of heroin in our community. There are a couple of interesting concerns, and I would say gaps in intelligence that we have. One of the things that we've picked up on that is more than a bit concerning, Louisville has always had a presence of outlaw motorcycle gangs, in particular the Outlaws, and then the Grim Reapers. Over the last probably 6 to 8 months, we have seen a number of patched members of the Hells Angels who really have had no presence in our community and are really, at least at some level, at war with the Outlaws in our community. And what we are hearing is they are in the area in an effort to try to monopolize the transportation of narcotics between Louisville and Lexington along the I-64 corridor. And I got to believe if we're seeing this in our city, it's going to be the same things around the other hottest states. Second, we're really trying to figure out the impact of the Mexican cartel on pricing of narcotics in our city. probably a question better for DEA, but not too long ago, you could buy a key of cocaine in our community for about $24,000. Today, it's almost twice that. And from the intelligence we're gathering, we believe the cartel has an impact on that. And that kind of change in the ability to get a hold of certain types of drugs, again, I think will drive more people towards the use of heroin. In terms of some things that we're doing that I think are working, I would love to tell you we've got some great insights on how to address the heroin problem. Probably the best thing that we have going on in our community right now is a Appalachia HIDA funded parcel interdiction task force. It involves the Kentucky State Police, the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office, our department, members of the Department of Homeland Security, Customs, and the Postal Service, and we really try to focus on a number of the local parcel shipping facilities, not only USPS and FedEx, but UPS has a rolled hub in our city out at the airport, and this interdiction task force is incredible. Just to kind of give you an idea, and this is something that they only do a day or two a week. So far this year, they have been able to seize, through their efforts, $2.2 million, 23 pounds of crystal meth, 3.7 tons of marijuana, 36 pounds of cocaine, and along the way they've been able to capture 190 packages that they've been able to ship to other cities to do controlled deliveries. So again, just a very effective use of HIDA funding, a very effective use of a task force to try to have an impact on a problem in a community. We have a great deal of work to do. Probably the biggest concern I have is how do we address the heroin problem in our community in terms of prevention and treatment. It is a challenge, and you know, how do you pull together a public health message that tells people how to safely use heroin? I mean, it's just impossible to do. So I don't know. We're still struggling to find answers, but I'm glad to have the opportunity to be here today.
John?
I'd like to tell you that I'll never forget April 18th, 1999. Tommy Farmer has heard this story before. It was the first day I ever was at a meth lab. I didn't know what a meth lab was. I went along with a DCS worker, Department of Children's Service worker, to remove a baby from a house that she thought would be hostile. So I was in there with another officer, and we saw this stuff cooking in the kitchen. We went in and smelled around. It wasn't food. So we called our sergeant, and he called somebody at the state, and they said, "Get the hell out of there." So we waited for this crime group, this cleanup group to come, and they actually told us that we were going to be cleaned up. Because of forums like this, though, we learned, and because of people like Tommy Farmer, who's the director of the NIST task force in Tennessee, we learned, and we've learned so much about this problem of methamphetamine, and we're doing all we can to fight it. Because of forums like this, and I want to thank the people who put it together, getting people together from different perspectives to address a problem will also make progress here. The chief did a great job explaining heroin. Somebody wrote a book one time and said the world is full of Frankensteins because somebody tried to do something good. There were two guys by the name of Wright and Beckett back in 1874 that were trying to find a new substance that would be less addictive than morphine. And they actually synthesized a substance called heroin. They actually didn't make the white stuff. They couldn't synthesize it. The fancy name I won't mention. But they made something that turned out to be black tar heroin. And most of the black tar heroin, which is what we're seeing in Putnam County now, we just made a major arrest about 3 weeks ago, is this brown, blackish stuff. It's really not very healthy to inject if you get the oily kind, because it's pretty tough on the veins, but it's cheap to make. It's a little more complicated than making methamphetamine by whatever method now they're making it. But it can be made inexpensively and brought into the country. There's two principal reasons why people are using it today. The receptors in the brain, principally the mu receptors, you've heard about those, the delta receptors, they build a tolerance to opioids after you take them for a while. And guess what? Heroin will overwhelm that tolerance and give you a feeling. And most opioids don't, most cocaine users are not looking for that. They're looking for something different, the depressive effect of opioids. The second reason, the chief also mentioned, is that you guys in law enforcement are doing a great job. It's getting more and more expensive to buy that hydromorphone, the Dilaudid. You're doing a great job. So guess what? The heroin's cheap. So for economic reasons, which is a factor you can't ever forget, and because of practical reasons, the withdrawal, because remember, addiction requires two things: withdrawal, tolerance, and also the withdrawal factor. So that's why it's here. And the other thing I remember that Tommy's told us many times in our meth meetings is that this is an extremely crafty crowd. As soon as we develop Plan A, they're going to counter it with Plan B. So you have to stay on your feet. So don't lose your confidence. These conferences work. I want to make a comment about Suboxone the other day. I want to herald what Dr. Walker said earlier. Suboxone as a pill is not an answer. Suboxone as a comprehensive treatment program can be helpful. I'm not much of a methadone fan. As a matter of fact, I've gone to certificate of need hearings and fought methadone clinics, but I'm a Suboxone fan if you use it like Dr. Walker does. Matter of fact, I go to American Society of Addiction medicine programs presented there on the methadone program that we had, the research we did in Nashville. But it's designed to help people detox, not to put them on it for the rest of their lives. So don't be hostile about Suboxone. But as a cop, I've gone to drug raids and I've seen these bottles that people have diverted. And that's why cops have a difficult time with it. Why are people abusing Suboxone? They use it as a bridge. They're willing to put up with that few minutes of discomfort from the naltrexone to get the effect of the Suboxone. It keeps them from withdrawing. So that's the problem with Suboxone. It's not their primary drug of choice, but they get it because it's cheap. But remember, the buccal strips have an identification number on them. So you get the buccal strips, you can trace them back to where they were prescribed initially. The pills don't have it, but the strips, the buccal strips do. I want to add something else about this issue about drugs, prescription drugs. We have a problem that's psychological. I'm a shrink, so I can talk about that. Don't walk, get up and leave. There's a psychological issue. There's three facets to it in the society. We're not promoting this. Doctors aren't promoting it, but people are. First of all, people try to accommodate themselves to accepting prescription and non-prescription drugs. On my intake form, I had a question: do you use illegal drugs? Almost everybody says no. And then in the interview, I found out that they were not telling the truth. So I had to add another question: do you use illegal drugs, illicit drugs? No. Then I had to ask another question: do you use pot? The people will say no to the first one and then yes to the second one, because people have accommodated the concept that many drugs that are technically illegal, by the way, I practice in Tennessee, are not actually illegal. And then I say, what does that mean? Well, they're really legal in some states. And then they'll say, well, in California you can get a prescription. I was raised in California. I can talk about my own state. And they'll say you can get a prescription, so they're not really illegal. You can go to Colorado and get them legally. And that mindset is a problem for us in Tennessee and in this area. And now they're saying, well, it won't be long until, Xanaxes are legal and hydros are legal. They don't ever say hydrocodone, they say hydros. That accommodation is a problem for us in law enforcement and in treatment. The second area is this issue of, quote, decriminalization. All the people out there know what that means. So now if we catch somebody with a little bit of marijuana, we write them a citation in lieu of arrest. And that's come about slowly over time. And then third, there's the concept of legalization. A lot of our users out there see this trend and believe that that's a justification to them. Well, it won't be long till it's legal. I'd say Tennessee will be one of the last states in the country to do that if it ever happens. But that psychological issue is a part of what we're fighting. So when we see people and they have a little bit, and they all have their scales, the ones that are using, and they measure. They know how much to have with them. They know that less than 10 tablets is not a felony. They know that. They're educated about it. And it's a part of what we're fighting every day as a psychological component of the presence. The other thing that we're dealing with prescription opioids in particular, and benzos are also a major problem, is that people are now calculating, just like they do with alcohol, 0.0, 0.08, well, they're figuring out how much they can drink. Is the concept about how much they can use in work, or how much they can use and, be driving and not be caught, not get in trouble. They calculate these things. Now, recently, I had one of my chronic users who's not interested in treatment tell me about some of the websites out there. I think the DEA is pretty much in touch with this, but we all need to look for these places. When you arrest someone, or you're working with someone as a prosecutor, or you're trying to help someone, ask them what they read, ask them where they go on the websites. There's an amazing bit of information. I've worked with anorexics before, and I've asked them what websites they go to. It was a shocking bit of information to see what kind of information they go to support their anorexia or their eating disorders. The same thing's true with our prescription pill addicts. There's information on the web that will shock you. It supports the abnormality of the addiction phenomenon. So they say, for instance, I'll never shoot up. Well, that's a progressive and it's a terminal and progressive illness. And that kind of psychological component is a part of what we're fighting. I would say in terms of dealing with this phenomenon, that just like I had to learn a lot about methamphetamine back in 1999, that we're in a growth process and a learning process. Without these conferences, you're going to be left behind quickly. Just like the Suboxone issue. Now, as a cop, I can't stand going in and finding 20 pill bottles and seeing that they're all coming from a few prescribers. Hopefully in Tennessee, this new law is going to change that. People like Dr. Mutter are going to change that, and it's happening in every state. Okay.
All right, then we'll go ahead and shift gears to our second topic, which is talking about the problems with tracking, reporting overdoses, and in particular, overdose deaths. Dr. Klein, of course, is Tennessee's state medical examiner, so she comes to us with the experience that we need on the panel to talk about that. And again, I'll try again with you to elicit your reaction once we've heard from you, Dr. Klein.
Thank you. I've been the state chief medical examiner in Tennessee for 14 months now. I'll note that the office is based right here in Johnson City. Across the street on the health, next to the medical school, is a forensic center. At that forensic center is a staff of 3, including myself, board-certified forensic pathologists who perform autopsies on individuals who have died from a variety of sudden or unexpected circumstances. The main purpose is to determine the cause of death and to also determine the manner of death. And in this region, there's 5 forensic centers in the state of Tennessee, and the one that's across the street serves upper northeast Tennessee, which consists of 8 counties. One thing I want to add is I want to correct a common misconception, and that is that once the person is deceased, why bother? They're dead. Why do we need to go through what we need to go through in order to determine the cause of death, and why does it matter that it's accurate? Well, just as I was being trained as a physician, through med school, residency, fellowship, the whole 9 yards was always holistic approach. And I believe, this is my personal philosophy, that it doesn't end with death. Death has significant effects on the living. Part of the medical examiner's role in public health and in the criminal justice system and for economics, for estate settlements, civil proceedings, criminal proceedings, it all goes back to the need of someone who's living. We must keep that in mind. The other thing that I want to remember is that there's two critical points. This is applicable. The nice thing about forensic pathology and death investigation is that if you do it the same way every time, you're not going to miss something. So in order to do that, you need raw data. You need uniform protocols. You need guidelines for people who aren't, may not be familiar with certain, they don't do what we all do on a daily basis. So we have to remember that the two critical points are the scene of death. And the second critical point is the forensic center. So it's analogous to a computer. In order for any information, and I'm not an IT person, so forgive me for the clumsy analogy in advance, but you have raw data. From the raw data, it then goes to the processor that makes all the sense out of it. In a death investigation, the raw data occurs at the scene, and you have one time to get it right, one time only. It's a science of origin. It's not reproducible. So you need to know steps A, B, C, and D before you get there so that we can minimize any chances of missing something that might be very significant as it relates to any of the reasons why an investigation is important. So that's the first link, is consistency at the scene and the death investigation consistency. The second important component is the forensic center. That's the computer processor. That's the people and the processes that are in place that's taking all of this information, medical information, law enforcement information, and their laboratory information, and putting it all together in context with that person's medical history, the scene findings, just like any other physician-patient interaction, all of that clinical correlation is occurring, except our patients can't talk to us. So we rely very heavily on the raw data that's collected at the scene. A lot of what I've heard today is talking about, a lot of it's based on mortality data when you talk about overdose deaths. And I don't think it's a new concept to anyone that death certificate information is not all that reliable. That's not a shocker. I want to take it one step further and say, well, we need to ask ourselves, how is the cause of death even being determined? How accurate is that? Evidence-based medicine and evidence-based procedures is also a common theme that I've recognized throughout the profession. And this past spring, an evidence-based recommendations came out, national recommendations, that found the following. They found that, I'm quoting from the actual paper, a complete autopsy is necessary for optimal interpretation of toxicology results, which must also be considered in the context of the circumstances surrounding death, medical history, and scene findings. Let's contrast that with what we know in Tennessee. In 2000, and I have the 2011 data, there were 1,062 overdose deaths in the state of Tennessee, residents. 62% of those were confirmed by autopsy. 38% were not. My question is, how accurate, how do we know that those 38% of the deaths actually had a drug overdose if they didn't have an autopsy, and if we don't know what went into that conclusion? That translates into 405 Tennessee residents who whose families may not know the accuracy of the cause of their loved one's death. Dr. Walker talked about the complexities of drug testing and the need for the individual, for a clinician to be familiar with the laboratory. And that is absolutely essential, even at the postmortem level. Everything that he was talking about with the metabolites, you have to add all those complexities, think of those complexities, and then add on top of that all of the whole phenomena that occur with the death process. I'm not going to go into all of those phenomena that occur, but there's enough of it to say that there's sufficient complexity in the post-mortem redistribution of drugs in the body after death, that as well as sample, where is the sample being taken, how is it stored, all of those pre-analytical variables contribute more to error than it does actually once it gets to the lab. Once the sample gets to the lab, it's pretty good. So I want to focus on what's happening at the scene so that we can get the right amount of raw data, so that, and then we need to consider what's going into the forensic centers so that they can support basic underlying infrastructure that not only will assist the prescription drug epidemic, but any other, once this is gone, something else is going to replace it. That's all I have right now.
Okay, this is the point where we would like to get some audience participation, in particular on this issue of the protocols that Dr. Klein referred to. From the public health perspective, the data is important, and proper collection leads to reliable data. From the law enforcement prosecutor side of the equation, those protocols, those death scene protocols, are very important to preserving the evidence and preserving a potential case, if there is one to be made, against the supplier of the drugs that led to the death. I know that each state has a slightly different system on the county level for coroners or medical examiners, and I'm sure each state has different training regimens. We've heard a little bit about Tennessee. I'd like to get some feedback from folks who have worked those investigations, and we can call on Chief Conrad to talk a little bit about how things work in Louisville, a metro area, and maybe Dr. Averett can talk a little bit more about a rural area in contrast. But let's get some reaction from you all.
Yeah, Dr. Klein, I had most of my law enforcement career has been spent in Commonwealth, Kentucky. In Kentucky, they have elected coroners. There's 120 counties in Kentucky. The coroners range from people that have some experience, that has some medical training, to people that are actually butchers in a butcher shop and the tow truck driver. The problem we've got, we recently sent out a survey to try to assist the United States attorneys in prosecuting some of those type of cases. The responses we're getting back are less than favorable to getting us a good picture. We sent it out to all 120 counties, a very simple questionnaire, but it's obvious, well, the first question we asked, have you had any prescription drug deaths in your county? I doubt if there's any county in Kentucky that hadn't had a drug overdose death. And so I'm just saying no, that's the end of it. But there's so many mistakes made, and you pointed it out at the beginning of this thing, and we can't go back and recreate that scene. If we don't have photographs, if we don't have the evidence taken care of properly, getting to you in a timely fashion so that nothing is destroyed, we're never going to be able to prosecute those cases. And how do we get the coroners that need it the most, how do we get them on board with us? That's a real struggle for us to...
Okay, well, first, to answer your question, I'll commiserate with you. Although there's a distinction between a coroner system and a medical examiner system, so the state of Tennessee, we do have a physician that's a county medical examiner. However, think about the healthcare changes that are occurring. Okay, you live in a semi-rural or rural county. You're lucky as a county if you have a doctor. And now you've got to be also the county medical examiner, because each county is mandated to have a county medical examiner. So everyone's stretched way too thin. They're not funded. We've got some county MEs who have been retired, and they've been trying to do what they can, and they have never had any assistance at all or guidance. So even though it's a medical examiner system, it's highly dependent on the involvement at the local county level. I'm trying to answer the same question that you are at this point in time, because we've got 95 counties, and we're requesting that all 95 counties report their deaths send their reports of investigation to my office. Out of 95 counties, 16 have responded. And that stems from a lack of legislative authority. So we're not going to educate ourselves out of this. You've got education without authority is just a suggestion.
That's a profound statement, and if I were really on my game, we would end dramatically there. Unfortunately, we've got 12 minutes left to fill before the break, but I think everybody should write that down. We'll keep that for future reference. Anybody else? Chief Roush. Oh, I'm sorry.
In terms of the investigations, have any of them in Tennessee led to a prosecution of a suspect who has provided, and what we're running into is, what my ME tells me is, when they're doing the autopsy, the one drug we think killed the person, we can't, make that statement because they've got 6 others in their system.
Right. Okay, so to answer your question, yeah, it's not just opiates. It's mixed drug, parentheses, hydrocodone. They love Xanax. So, around here it's Oxy and Xanax, in this area. But I don't have an answer to that, because my role as the medical examiner is impartial. It's not influenced by either the prosecution side or law enforcement. So I don't ask those questions. So I'm sorry, I don't have the answer.
Chief Roush, I will tell you that in Kentucky, and I know my colleague Carrie Harvey can speak to this as well as, if not better than me, we do have active investigations. We have had successful cases that follow from this. And I don't want to sound like we're beating up on the coroners in Kentucky, because there are significant groups of them that are working with us. And to Dr. Klein's point about the mandatory education, we're working, HIDA, the U.S. Attorney's offices are working with HIDA and our State Department of Criminal Justice Training, and a significant number of our coroners and our state medical examiner, colleague of Dr. Klein's, to put together some training that would be mandatory along these lines to standardize some of these protocols. But the short answer is yes, if that, as Dr. Klein describes it, that correct diagnosis is made on the front end, then we can have, and Carrie, you can jump in here, if you'd like, but we can have a successful case against the supplier of the drugs that caused the death.
And just to follow up on Chief's question, we work very closely. The General's Office and I prosecuted in Sullivan County right next door to Washington. In years past, we have successfully prosecuted a number of individuals on second-degree murder charges. In Tennessee, the delivery or selling schedule 1 or 2 is the approximate cause of death. You can prosecute, but what we have been facing in most recent years is a drug cocktail. The toxicologist cannot separate Schedule 2 from 3 to 4 that everything else is in there. So that when we meet with Dr. Klein or some of the other nephrologists and look at the toxicology results, we can't meet that definition of second-degree murder.
I'd like to add something about that, and that is when it is, this again goes back to how it affects the living. As someone who's going to certify how somebody died, because in the state of Tennessee, they can get prosecuted for second-degree murder. I'm gonna, if you need an autopsy before I'm gonna say that something caught, you know, a drug that you can't see except on a laboratory is going to cause your death. There are other findings in the autopsy that will support that or exclude it. He was talking about the oily substance that's in certain heroin. Well, that's interesting. This is just off the top of my head, but if it's an oily substance and they're injecting it, then when I look at the lungs under the microscope, I'll be able to see fat globules. And that would trigger in my mind, that's not normal. And then that goes down my differential diagnosis list of fat globules in the in the lungs. Why are they there? And then that would lead me to, well, I've done this toxicological panel, and then I could look at the fillers in certain drugs. I mean, there's a lot of information that you could find that is just, frankly, being missed and disregarded because they figure, oh, they're dead, who cares? But
Kerry Harvey?
We have been able to prosecute a few of these cases successfully, and this is an area where the law in the federal system is better than most states in a couple of ways. First, the penalties in the federal system, it's a mandatory minimum of 20 years up to life. And in the federal system, there's no parole, there's no probation, and actually the sentencing judge does not have the authority to reduce that sentence. So we can light them up pretty good. The other aspect of the federal system where the law is more favorable to law enforcement is we don't have to prove proximate cause, which connotes some element of foreseeability, that the drug dealer could foresee that the person might kill themselves with these drugs. All we have to do really is prove something like but-for causation, which would be but for the dose of heroin, the person would still be alive, that sort of thing. So we have found that autopsies are absolutely critical, and we have to treat these death scenes as crime scenes and not accident scenes. That's critical to being able to do this. And I would also say that we're not just looking at street corner heroin dealers. We fully anticipate that we will indict physicians and pharmacists and, the drug dealers in a lab coat. And we fully anticipate that we'll send them away for 20 years to life. We think there's a lot of deterrent value in that. I did have a question, Doctor. When you are trying to determine, again, there's always a cocktail of drugs in the system, which is not always a complete impediment to these prosecutions. Can you kind of walk us through what you do when you get in an overdose death case, what you do to determine the cause of death?
okay, the first thing I want to know is how they were found. That tells me so much. How were they found? Who saw them last? How did they behave when they were last seen? who found them dead, where were they, what position is the body in, and what's the time interval. Those are just basic information I need before I can move any further. In the majority of my cases, the investigative information I receive is found dead. So after I find that information, and I have, just like a I need a, what's called a medical legal death investigator. That's someone who has special training in how to investigate a death in an impartial way. They're not concerned with was there a crime committed. They're concerned with helping the doctor figure out what caused the death and what's the manner of death, what are the circumstances. So the death investigator will call and get that information, that history that I need. Then, after I've received enough history, I do a complete external examination of the body. There's some cases that I do an examination of the body, and I can tell that it just doesn't look like it doesn't look like an overdose death. I can give an example of a known heroin user who, the history that I got was that they, probably shot up heroin a certain time interval prior to being found dead. Well, when I did the examination, I saw these little hemorrhages underneath the fingernails. And that, I thought, not normal. That's what normal, not normal. So the under the fingernails, that's a sign that there's some kind of emboli that are coming off and causing little hemorrhages. So it turns out this individual happened to have endocarditis. He had an infection of the heart valve. Probably it was ultimately due to a period of intravenous drug use, but his toxicology came back negative, 0, nothing. So that's just one anecdotal example that I can attest to. If that person had not come in for an autopsy, then Tennessee would be at 1,063 overdose deaths in 2011. So after that's like how I conclude a case. Then you do the internal examination. You're looking for certain things. A lot of the findings in a drug-related death are non-specific, and that's why it's really important to correlate it with the history. So I find if there's any other physical reason that could explain death, and I collect the right toxicological specimens, because they need to be collected in a certain manner from a certain location. And then at that time, then for most drug-related deaths, it's pending toxicology. We don't know until we get the tox back. Once we get the toxicology back, then we have to look at the balance between, is this someone who is a chronic user? What's their tolerance level? How many drugs are on the list that are in there that have been detected in the tox panel? And it's not just about a number. A number doesn't mean anything. There's fatal concentrations, but we're talking about limited data, limited information to pull, because you can't kill people with a known amount of drug on them and then draw tox. So there's limited data to compare what a fatal concentration is to a non-fatal concentration. You also have to consider mixed drug interactions. What we think of opiate overdoses are respiratory depression, but there's not, that's a mechanism of death, the physiological reason why, what causes the heart to stop and the breathing to stop. There's certain drug interactions that might instead cause a seizure, which would lead to a cardiac arrhythmia. So then I asked, if there's no other signs of respiratory depression, I can look at the scene information and see if there's any information at the scene that looks similar to, looks like some seizure activity may have happened, and a trained medical legal death investigator knows what to key in on, so that the correct information gets to the doc. And then, I also use the medical examiners in the state of Tennessee have access to the controlled substance monitoring database. So I use that in cases where they have chronic disease, they've been on painkillers for a long period of time, but they also have significant medical disease. And then it becomes a judgment call between, what kind of tolerance versus did they die with drugs in their system, or did they die because of drugs in their system?
I'm sorry, I just wanted to answer, I think I can answer part of a question I heard behind me about tracing it back and prosecuting doctors. I know in the state of Tennessee, we've prosecuted two doctors, one in, I guess, kind of East Tennessee, Morristown, being stationary, and then one in West Tennessee for improper prescribing, and they both got in excess of 20 years federal time. Now, I reviewed the cases in both of those doctors' trials, and I testified in court as well. And although, you couldn't pin the specific death to them, they certainly had a lot of people dying of drug overdoses, okay? More than you would think you should have. And so, in my opinion, they were both criminals, and I'm glad they're in jail. And then the other thing is, I'm working a case right now in Richmond, Virginia, and the FBI agent that I'm working with called me excited. They handed down 72, the grand jury handed down 72 indictments for improper prescribing, but one indictment for involuntary manslaughter. And so that one is new ground, and I'll let you know how that one turns out. I got subpoenaed yesterday, so at the end of November, but I do know we had those. There may be more.
Got time for one more question, comment right here.
I may not need that. Karen, question for you. Is it going to require what you were talking about in requiring reporting or uniform reporting by all the medical examiners? First, is that going to be a legislative issue? Is that a regulatory issue that you can handle?
Okay.
And then second part to that, do you have any insight or do you have any say as to the qualifications of the medical examiners that are selected in each of these counties? And part three, is there anything that conflicts them out? For example, that they may be part owner or they may be also the owner of a pain clinic?
Okay. First, I'll start with that and then end on a positive note. It is true that in the state of Tennessee, there's nothing to prevent a county medical examiner from also owning a pain clinic or operating a pain clinic, or the same person. It's possible. I have 16 people report to me out of 95 because of reporting. But there are conflicts of interest. Potential conflicts of interest include that. It also includes working along with law enforcement, because that's it should be an unbiased investigation. And also other conflicts include, well, I think those are the two main ones that involve this. The second, what was your second question?
The uniform reporting, is it going to require regulatory?
Okay, so the state of Tennessee in 2012, they passed a law requiring the Department of Health to write a protocol for uniform investigation and reporting of deaths resulting from opiate, illegal, or illicit drugs. So that protocol is going to be in effect November 28th of 2013. And the main components of that protocol incorporates the evidence-based recommendations remember, the two critical points, the scene and then the forensic center. So it incorporates U.S. Department of Justice, National Institute of Justice death scene investigation guidelines, along with Tennessee's unique makeup of the individual counties, and then it requires something that's free, absolutely free, is the good old-fashioned phone call. Anytime that a decedent is found, the county medical examiner needs to be notified. This clarifies that a drug-related death is considered unnatural and should be a reportable case of the ME. So that's one thing that this does. The second thing it does is it establishes a link between the county medical examiner and the forensic center. We can't expect all of the community physicians who are wearing 4 other hats to be able to keep up on maintaining a relationship with their laboratory to make sure, and postmortem redistribution and drug-drug interactions in the postmortem matrix. So if they call the forensic center that they're sending the body to, those are the doctors that are keeping track of all that. They will know. They're the liaisons between the laboratory side. So it's going to require a phone call to the forensic center. We're expanding it from a simple body notification to a consultation between 2 professionals, like any other medical consultation should be.
Thank you all very much. Give the panel a hand.